Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us here at Magical Ireland with me. Tonight, my guest is Adrian O'Neill. Adrian is from Sligo, my own home county, and he is a tour guide for some of our tours coming up in 2025. He's a historian, a local historian. He owns Wild West Tours. He's the owner of Hanson and O'Neill Productions, and he is an amazing, very interesting person to talk to. I could have talked to him all night long. So hang with us for about an hour and listen to all the stories he has to tell us about different aspects of Sligo and different aspects of Ireland and his work. Hello, everybody. You're very welcome back to Magical Ireland with me. As I said, tonight is my guest is Adrian O'Neill. He's from my county of County Sligo, and he's from Sligo town. Adrian, am I right?
I am indeed, born and bred.
What part?
So I was born and my parents lived in Charles Street in town,
Oh, lovely. Yeah.
on the way up to the Peace Park. Then for a few years, then we lived in Cranmore, down in
Yeah.
Banks' Drive. After that, then we moved to Ballytibbin, Woodlands. And my parents are still there. So
Are they still
yeah.
there? Yeah. But where are you now? Are you out in Ballygawley or are you down in Galway?
No, I'm in Galway at the moment. So just living there, just outside the city.
What side?
So if you're coming in to where the G Hotel is,
Yeah, Renvoil, out that way.
yeah, so just in Well Park, just right there.
Because
Not
I
too
have a
far
son
away.
who lives in Renvoil village.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
not too far.
Yeah. Actually, I'll be in Galway next week. What date is it? I think it's the 26th or 27th, 28th. I have a tour for Halloween. We're going to be
Oh,
seeing the parade and all that carry on. But anyhow, that's where you come from. So, Adrian, just to let people know your interests and how you got into first of all, you're a historian and you have a wealth of history about the area. You actually have a Facebook page. What's it called?
so the Sligo Heritage and History Club. So we've got like 26,300 members currently at the
Fantastic.
moment.
Yeah,
So
it's a great site. It's a great Facebook page. There's an awful lot. There's a wealth of information and historical information about the area on it. How did you get into that?
well, I'll go first the whole way back about how I got into history. So I was always fascinated by history. My history teacher in secondary school in Ballinol College there in town. My teacher was Eileen Kelly, and the way she would talk about history, she'd rope you in like stories of Magellan, Christopher Columbus, the Crusades, everything. I loved every bit of it. So I went off to college anyways. I studied archaeology, classical studies, history. I went to college to become an archaeologist. But in my second year, then I led more towards classical uh, history, so the likes of ancient Rome, ancient Greece, like their literature and so on. Um, and then a few years after college, I was basically unemployed for about 6 years. Couldn't get a job. Sligo being a small town, you had to kind of know somebody to get a job.
Yeah.
It was a bit frustrating, really. But I was doing courses all along that time. And in 2015, I started a tourism course. Um, I have I have this thing every year. I for my New Year's resolution, I want to see three new places, and I want to learn a new skill. That's what I do every year.
Fantastic.
So that year, yeah, so that year I was very shy. I'm very shy back then.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have me on a voice call like this now.
Yeah.
So what I done, I was like, all right, for this year in 2015, I want to get kind of come out of my shell. How do I do that? So I decided public speaking was the way to go forward.
Wow, that was a big
So when I
step.
was doing the tourism course, yeah, so yeah, I had for my work experience for the tourism course. Now this was unpaid, so I had to do something tourist wise. So a lot of people went into hotels or went into the industry there. But I decided a friend of mine at the time was going out with a girl who owned her own tour company. So I asked her, would it be all right if I done my couple of weeks with her?
Yeah.
And she said, yeah, fine, no problem. So I got there anyways, and she's a maritime archaeologist and she does coastal trails and other trails around Sligo. And I thought she'd just throw me into the office. And I might do one or two odd tour here or there. I'd say a wee bit during her tours, which was the case for the first week. It wasn't until the second week we found out that the Sligo Town tourist office were looking for tour guides. So she was like, right, I've not done this before. We need to sit together. We need to kind of, you take one half of the town, I'll take the other. We'll do the history of it. So we done that. We compiled what we could. We went on a few uh, town tours, and it's very interesting. Like that. So yeah, I think the first week she done a few of them first, and she turned around to me one day and she goes, "Oh, just to let you know, you're going to be doing your own tour next week." Uh, I I nearly fell over, and I landed up with 30 something students from Donegal, some language school. Uh, and interestingly, over the years, I think my first tour was like an hour and 20 minutes long.
Oh, you
And
were really thrown
just,
in. You were really thrown into the deep end, weren't you?
yeah. And I think coming up to before COVID, I struggled to keep the tour at 2 hours and 45 minutes. Like I kept trying my best not to go over that. I think my record is something like 3 hours and 25 minutes for Sligo Town,
Really?
which is which is crazy, crazy. There was just far too much. Every tour, someone would ask a question, or as I was progressing through this Sligo Heritage page, I was always learning something new about a certain part of the town. So the tour was constantly changing. Um, so there was one time I was doing the tour with this lady, anyways, and we were doing a group of Americans jumped off, and one of the guy who owned the company actually happened to be my aunt's ex-husband. He just fell in love with Ireland when he came over. He fell in love with Sligo, and he brought that love and passion back with him. And then what he done was he set up his own tour company and, he said, I didn't know you were into this. And I was like, I didn't know you were into this.
Yeah.
And he was, well, why won't you come work for me next year after you finish your work experience? So I said, yeah. I said, fine. I was just, I was doing it anyways
Yeah.
afterwards. So once I kind of got into the spirit of doing touring, I
Yeah.
was doing it as, like part-time anyways on the side because I was working in a local supermarket too. And so he had like a company appreciation night every year, and there was a gentleman that was sitting next to me at this dinner, a very old enough gentleman. He's been in doing like history for years and years, and we just hit it off at the table. We were just like chatting nonstop. I think it was just hard to pull each other away from him. Like we just like literally became instant friends.
Yeah.
And I after that, then we just made, we would meet every week for coffee, and we would talk about everything: history, folklore, mythology, ghosts, ghost
Yeah.
stories. And one day, I think after our third or fourth meeting, we were like sitting in Ulster by a river. That was
Yeah.
our usual place. And he was like, why won't we make this a common theme and ask people who are interested in it to do the same? Well, I turned around and says, that's a great idea, but we can also create a Facebook page.
Yeah.
And, people could talk about the same things. Now, at the time, I didn't know that there was a few Facebook pages like that, and also like so I set it up, and I go off and I do a research on maybe a street name or a bit of history on this, a bit of history on that, and I would share it online. And then I'd also go on the National Library of Ireland archives and go through old photographs and share them on Facebook. So I think when I first set a page up, there was 60 members. I just added all my friends and people I thought would be interested in it. I told them, look, add who you want, who you think would be interested in the page. And if you don't want to be on a page yourself, just delete yourself afterwards. So I think so 2015 that year. And then I got a job as a night porter of that during that winter. And I remember it must have been because people were coming home. I think that's what it was. People had nothing better to be doing. And all of a sudden, this explosion on the page. I think I went from 60 to like 1,000 in like 3 hours. And then went
Wow.
from 1,000 members to 10,000 before New Year's Eve. I think around New Year's Eve, it was like 12,000 people.
And
So
how long
yeah,
was it
and
at
then
this stage? Was that only a couple of months?
it was only a couple of months. I think I set it up in, oh, what was it, May? It was May, around May 20, 2017. Sorry, 2017 was when I set it up, May 2017.
Yeah.
And that Christmas, it just exploded.
Wow.
There was nothing from us. I did set up meetings. We had small meetings in the beginning, like in the Clayton, and I would choose a topic. So I think the first one was kind of to get people around to see what they wanted to talk about, what kind of meetings they wanted.
Yeah.
And I had a room in the back then in the Clayton where we could all sit around and we discuss it then. The first one was old cures and remedies.
Oh yeah, I
Or,
love that. I'm big time into that. It's fantastic.
yeah, so we spent a good hour there just chatting, having
Yeah.
tea and discussing, like,
Yeah. Do
everybody
you
that was there.
remember the Denneens that lived, they were the daughter was a hairdresser beside the Four Lanterns.
Means,
Denneens.
not that I
The
recall, but like I've a vague memory of something being there, but not.
Yeah, there was a
There was like,
hairdresser's and it was an old woman, Mrs. Deneen, and her daughter was a hairdresser, but Mrs. Deneen had the cure of asthma. And I went to Mrs. Deneen for my two youngest children at the time, and she had the cure of asthma. Talking about cures, that just came to mind now.
yeah, there's a few people I know. I know a friend of mine's father has a cure for thrush.
Thrush. And
Um,
there was a woman who was on the hill. We called it the hill. I don't know. Harmony Hill, maybe?
no, we we call it the hill, like where the fort is. That's what we call the hill.
Well, on your way, let's say if you were to go up, you'd be coming down by Markovit's house. You'd be coming down that hill by
Yeah, yeah,
Markovit's house. Well,
that's the hill.
yeah, that's the hill. Well, there was a man in there that had ferrets, and ferrets' leavings would cure whooping cough.
Jesus, oh God.
Yeah,
There's
they used to give the ferrets milk, and you would take the what was left that where the ferrets didn't drink, and you would give it to your
that's
child.
gas.
Yeah,
There was so last week I fell on my stove and I burned my arm. And I went home, so I was trying to air it out. And I went home then for my mum's 60th, and there was a girl there, and she's just like, Adrian, I know a guy who's got the cure of the burn.
my
And
father
I
had the
was just,
cure of the burn.
yeah. And actually, that apparently, if you lick the man keeper, the wee
Yeah,
tiny
yeah,
lizards on the bogs, you yourself get the cure of the burn.
yeah. My father had the cure of the burn.
So they're like, "Oh, do you don't mind him licking the wound?" I'm like, "Look, if it cures it, it cures it."
Yeah,
But I actually woke up the next day and I completely forgot about it. I was rushing back to Galway, so completely forgot. But it's curing nicely anyway. So
yeah. And you won't have a scar.
yeah, I've heard this now. And then one of the girls at the meeting at that time, she actually said that when she was young, she burned herself, and she was 100%. She said it worked. And it was funny because I was reading a thing too that they're saying that the cure for arthritis was nettles.
Oh,
And
really?
when I said that, one of the guys burst out laughing, this older gentleman across the room, and he goes, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense." And I was like, "Why?" He goes, "Well, I used to have this neighbor who I thought was crazy. And every morning he'd wake up, take off his jumper and t-shirt, and start rolling around the nettles of his backyard." So
Well, talking about nettles, and I remember I was actually telling my husband this yesterday, which is funny. My grandmother used to go out during the springtime and collect the young spring nettles, and she'd put them into our cabbage and bacon. She reckoned that it purified the blood. Now,
jeez.
yeah, in America they don't have nettles, or not around here anyhow, because it dawned on me one day, God, there's no nettles around here. And so my husband was looking it up, and he was looking up the healing properties of nettles. But she used to get the young nettles and put them in our cabbage. And
Yeah.
and she reckoned it purified the blood. All these old
And
people
was that,
had all these they just knew stuff, Adrian. And it's an awful pity it's gone
yeah,
because it's, you know,
yeah,
an awful lot of it made sense. Like I know
yeah,
that there's healing properties in dandelions.
yeah, dandelions, yeah. Or what did you used to call them? Or is that okay to say?
Say that again?
The nickname for them when we were growing up in
Oh
Sligo.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
I
don't,
know, yeah.
I don't think anybody says that anywhere else
No,
in the
they
country.
don't. They don't say that. No, but yeah, there was cures for it. And then what else was there? Oh, there was a lot of cures. There was a man in Donegal, I think, that had the cure of the bleed if you were bleeding. And then there was a guy I went down in Tipperary
Yeah,
who was a bone setter. I had a slip disc and he was a bone setter. So an awful lot of
yeah.
that stuff.
My aunt had really bad problems with sciatica for years,
Yeah,
and she tried everything. She must have spent a fortune. And she said she went down. No, I can't remember now where she went. Was it Roscommon or something like that? And she came back and she couldn't believe it. She's gone. Pain was gone.
yeah,
She was like, she tried everything. And she said she was a wee bit weirded out because obviously your man was putting his hands everywhere,
yeah,
and breathing and doing all of these things, which made her feel wee bit uncomfortable. But that was it.
yeah.
Gone.
I went down to this guy
That's
and
crazy.
he worked with horses all the time, but he was a bone setter. Now I was bent over, you know, but he put me on this table and he got me to bring up my leg and he got his thumb and he did something and I could feel it clicking. And then he flipped me around. I was like a little doll. He just flipped me around and he did it again and I heard another click and I got up and I was as straight as a die, But
That's
you're the
crazy.
no, yeah, it is because you could spend an awful lot of money at chiropractors and at doctors and whatnot.
Yeah.
Having said that, I did end up having a ruptured disc afterwards and I had to have an operation. But however, that's another story.
Yeah. There was one guy that was saying something very interesting was uh, to cure or to stop bleeding from a wound,
Yeah,
uh, spider webs, cobwebs.
that'd make sense because there's penicillin in spider webs.
Yeah, and some fella again, and at the meeting burst out laughing because that makes more sense, a lot of sense. He's like, why? Because my father, whenever he cut himself when he was in the farm shed, he said he would just go into the corner, scoop up the cobweb, and he would just slap it on his wherever he cut himself.
There you go.
So I was just like, but that ended up being a very, very good meeting. I have to say I
Yeah,
enjoyed that.
I
It was
would
great.
love to have been at that meeting. That would be a very good meet. That would be a very interesting meeting.
Because what we done, we split into two is all cures and remedies, and place names. So we went on to talk about place names and their origins. But
Yeah.
like, I would have happily sat for the rest of the next half an hour just doing like all
Well,
cures and remedies.
yeah, yeah. Place names are
Uh,
very interesting as well. People don't realize that,
yeah, but I mean, if you go to anywhere in the country and you want to learn the history of a location, there you go. It's right in front of you.
it's right in front
Actually,
of
it's
you.
funny enough. I should have when I got married last year, each table had uh, the name of a place. Um, so let's say I'm from Ballytivnan, so I put all my friends who I grew up with at the Ballytivnan table. So
Yeah.
on it, I said Ballytivnan, what it was in Irish,
What
and
is
what
it
it
in Irish?
means. It means
What
Tivnan's town.
Tiffinstown? Because Schligach is a shelly place, and it's, if you see when the tide is out in Sligo Bay, it's glaringly obvious why it was called Schligach.
Yeah, but like
No,
even one day I was walking up by the back avenue. And I was just kind of like, I was sitting down by the river, just there, not too far away from where the old boathouse used to be. And I was just kind of messing around with the stones, swooping them left, right. And swear to God, there was a couple of seashells.
Yeah.
That's so far up the river. I was just like, oh, I was like,
Yeah.
so, you know,
Yeah, that
and
is.
I think Wood Martin said that in around the 19th century that there were there was a complete revamp of Sligo town because all these the streets were so narrow that all these new coaches couldn't drive up the streets. Like you could literally lie like literally horizontal, and that's how wide the streets were. So these
Yeah.
big, huge coaches couldn't drive through. So a lot of the old buildings had to be torn down, streets widened, and then rebuilt.
Yeah.
But actually, when they tore one down and they were making way to rebuild a new one, they found hundreds of seashells
Yeah.
in the
I've read
foundation.
that,
Uh,
yeah. Yeah.
and
I've
even
read it.
there's one gentleman who brought me around town one day, and he brought me to a certain part of just near the river. It's not too far away from the river. It's in the middle of the town, and then he starts stumping the ground, and you could hear this hollow sound. And
Really?
he goes, Do you know what that is?" And I was like, "No." I was no clue. Like, we're just in the middle of a small car park, and you're just stamping on the soil. He goes, "I believe firmly that that's a shell mill that has not been excavated yet." So, and I wouldn't be surprised with the amount of shell middens that they find in most times in Strandhill and the likes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you just know, like all that whole area, it would make a lot of sense that, when during the Neolithic period when people were hunting and gathering, I was taught this in archaeology, that during the summer months they'd go inland and hunt for deer and, they'd go hunting. And then during the winter months, they'd go to coastal areas. So Sligo Bay is perfect. It's
Yeah.
protected. It's not too far of a walk to the sea from anywhere around Gibraltar rocks.
Yeah.
They could easily get what they wanted there and bring them into town. And again, shell middens, for people who don't know, who'll be watching this, are just waste deposits of those people back then. So
Yeah.
I well believe it. I heard the sound, like I couldn't believe it. I was like, that's crazy.
There you go. Well, of course, you came from the great place to do archaeology because Sligo is riddled with Neolithic sites like court tombs and like Carrowkeel and Carramore, and then you've got Creevakeel and you've got the Parklands, is it? Up out Hazelwood, up that is it Parklands it's called?
Oh yeah, that's I can't think of the
Court
name of it
Tomb as
now.
well.
Deer Park.
Deer
Yeah.
Park, sorry. Yeah, Deer Park. There's so much. I mean, the place
I
is rich in archaeology.
the Irish for that, actually I can never pronounce when I'm doing tours up there. It's gas. It's a really long. I'm just like I'll just say Deer Park. Just say Deer Park.
Yeah, Deer Park, yeah.
It's a lot interesting because when you say Deer Park and you tell them that that area was actually they brought deer in for the winds to hunt, and then you can talk about the winds then about
Oh, so that's why it's called Deer Park. I just
yeah.
thought
So
that there
that's
was
that
forests up there and that there was a lot of deer up there. I presumed, like that's
that
how you
whole
identify
land,
it.
that whole land, that countryside was owned by the winds. So that's where
Ah,
they went their hunt. So when
yeah.
you see old photographs of the winds with their guns out, you can that's where they were heading. I'd say later on that day.
And did they own Hazelwood House?
The winds, yeah, they
Yeah.
owned it
So they would
from
have had all the
that's like
lands around there as well.
18th century, right the whole way back. So on one side of the river you would have had the winds, and then the other side of the house part or the other part of the river you would have had the martins or wood martins.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, you're talking about old Neolithic tombs. Like it's gas too, because I done a talk there 2 weeks ago all about Cleaver and that whole area, and it was interesting to show people, the roundabout and
Yeah.
the Abbey Quarter,
Yeah.
like to tell them that that's a passage to, and they
Yeah.
couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
They're like, so that's like Newgrange. It's like, yep. So
Yeah.
that's exactly what that is.
Exactly. It is.
Uh, and
It's a
there's a lovely tale. Did
go
you
on.
hear the tale about that? What happened to that site?
No.
About so there was a couple of workers back in the 50s. I think the houses were built in the 50s, and in the 60s then. what happened was there was a local priest and he wanted to take down that whole site. He wanted to flatten it, because everybody obviously had their superstitions back then. That site is very close to the town. Um, so basically they were on top of that site. There used to be a very old hawthorn tree,
Yes. Oh,
and everybody was tell warning. So basically, the priest was going to pay people to them, and the men who said that they'll take down the hawthorn tree, but they won't take down the fairy fort. That's what they
yeah,
called it back then.
yeah,
And everybody warned that the five men that do not take down the hawthorn tree. That's
yeah,
the fairies. You don't mess with the
yeah,
hawthorn tree.
yeah.
So they didn't listen to them anyways. All five men took down the tree, and within a year, all five men were dead.
Yeah.
All by accidents. Yeah,
Oh,
I heard one accident. One of them walked out in front of the car. And actually, the lady that who tells that story quite often is one of those men was actually her father.
there you go. Yeah, because like Adrian, a very strongly held belief in Ireland that you don't mess with the fairy fort and you don't mess with the fairies. Even to this day, I remember the controversy that was going on when they wanted to build that motorway up near Dublin, and they were going to go through, and I think they did actually go through a fairy fort.
Yeah.
You remember that?
I can't remember that one. I do remember the one that I'm not sure if it was in Curry. I think it was Curry, where they were going to build a big road, and the ring fort was right bang in there, and there's the politicians that were there, and they were like, "No, no, don't. You can't build it over." They actually built around it.
Yeah, I heard that as well. But I remember talking about, superstitions and things like that. I will explain to people, like, I mean, come Tuesday, I'll be explaining to people, like, in America, cursing is not a thing that you do. It's not, people don't like it. But like, I would always tell people, well, when you're in Ireland, people just think it to be words and it's not a big deal and everybody curses and it's a de-stressant and people don't get offended by it. But if an Irish person puts a curse on you, that's a serious situation, because a person can put
Yeah.
can put a curse on another person. And I remember years and years ago listening to Midwest Radio, and there was a woman called Bina McLaughlin. I don't know if you remember this controversy or not, but Bina McLaughlin was from Connemara. And Bina was a great woman for healing. She had many, many remedies, and she was a great woman for. She'd come on the radio and she'd talk to Paul Claffey about different remedies and different healing things. And people would ring in and say, "Can you ask Bina what's a good cure for arthritis?" And she'd kind of say, "Sure, if you lie down under it, wouldn't it kill you?" In other words, move, walk, keep
Yeah, yeah,
active. But that was the way she'd answer things. But she'd come on the air now and again. Paul would interview her, and she'd be trying to raise money for this, that, or the other. And there was a children's hospital that she was raising money for. And she had just been on the air and she had been saying um about a bingo machine or bingo something, but she was raising money for this local children's hospital. And some guy rang in after her. And this guy was so annoyed that every time Bina was on the radio, she was asking for money, you know? And Bina must have heard the interview and she rings back in and she puts a curse on him. And this became a nationwide controversy. And in the end, it was even brought up to the Dáil that this woman had put a curse on this guy. And when she did put the curse on him, he ended up losing his job. Whatever curse she put on him, one way or another, it wasn't any good for him. He didn't, he suffered because of it. And Paul Claffey was asking by it actually went to the Dáil and um Eamon O'Keefe brought it up in the Dáil, or I don't know how it happened, but it became a massive national controversy, and people were ringing in and asking Paul, will you ask Bynett to take the curse off this guy because, he's suffering. So she was interviewed again on the radio, and the way she put it to Paul, he says, would you not consider taking the curse off him? And she says, well, it's like this, she said. If he doesn't deserve it, it won't land on him. She decided, she was very diplomatic. Like it's like, well, sure, look, if he's a good guy, if he doesn't deserve it, it won't land on him, but it won't affect him one way or another. If he's not a good guy, it will.
Yeah, like even today now there are certain questions like I well believe I grew up with you always bring a stone up to you on Knocknarea
Oh yeah,
and you put it down and you make a wish. I went up there, oh God, I don't know how long ago. I think it was a lot scary to even think it's maybe nearly 20 years ago now.
yeah.
I went up and I actually walked from town the whole way up to Knocknarea. And
Wow.
you know how far of a distance that
Yeah,
is. And it was roasting on that day. I said, you know what? I took the notion. I'm gonna go up, I'm gonna climb up Knocknarea. So I went out, went up to the cannon, touched the cannon. That was my goal for the day. Then I climbed Knocknarea and I went up with a rock and I put it on the grave. And I sat there and I was just thinking, I made three wishes. Um, so my first wish was I wanted to go to college. No, I didn't get the point for college, so I didn't do really well on my leaving cert. And within 2 years, I was in college.
yeah,
And second one was I wanted to fall in love, and I wanted to get married. Now, most people who know me, I'm a bit of a strange one when it comes to, meeting people. I like my own space, and I don't. There's very few people I'd be myself around.
yeah,
And then there you go, got married last year. So I'm
yeah.
waiting on my third wish, which is become a millionaire. But
And something, something, Adrian, sometimes you don't realize that you are a millionaire until, like, you could define that as being overly abundant. It might not be
yeah,
money, it might be something totally different. And you realize, God, I was a millionaire, but I didn't know it. I mean, do
yeah.
you know what I'm
But
saying?
I'm a very, yeah, no, I'm very appreciative to where I am. It's a lot different than I was a couple of years ago. Like a couple of years ago, I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Yeah,
I was kind of going from job to job, and now I know I want to. I'm a historian, so I know what better way to do what you do best, but to share it with other people.
yeah, and
So
and the enjoyment of it, and when you're doing something that you love doing, and you are very, very good. You were doing tours of around Sligo and the history of Sligo, and people love that. I mean, to have somebody talk to you and know what they're talking about, you
yeah,
know, and feel passion for it. I mean, you love Sligo, you love the country, but you love Sligo and the Northwest, and you've got a passion for it, Adrian, and that's what sets you apart from, let's say, anyone who's just coming in to be a tour guide just because they need a job.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
No, it's and I know when I started off even before COVID, somebody would message me or someone would tag me and would post saying, "Here, somebody wants to do a tour of Sligo," and I'd be just finished working Tesco, and I'd be like, "Oh yeah, sure, I'm around for an
yeah,
hour or two. What do you want to do?" And I do it for free. I never asked for anything. They'd give me a coffee, of
yeah,
course, or something, or
yeah,
maybe a pint of Guinness afterwards. So
yeah,
but to me, that's nothing. That's one person that's going to go off knowing a wee bit more about Sligo, and might share that with a friend, and that person might come back. So
yeah.
you know,
Well,
might
I
not
used to have
remember
that,
everything, but like,
yeah. When I was teaching,
yeah,
yeah, when I was teaching the music at summer schools, the singing, and you'd be talking about all these different places, and you'd have people from all over the world coming to learn traditional singing, and you now and again I would take a carload and we'd go off and we'd bring them. Let's say I would talk about Josie McDermott and the songs like Una One, and I'd bring them out to Lough and show them McDermott's Island, and we'd talk about Trinity Island, talk about Una One and Tomás Lorger Cuchtela, who came from about 5 miles from where I grew up. And you've all this rich history, and you've got my Gara Castle, and oh sure, I mean, you had the Crannogs out in Lough Gara, and then you go down to Sligo, and you've got Carrowkeel, you've got Carramore, you've got Knocknarea. It's a wealth of history. I mean, it's unbelievable, really. And people just loved
Yeah,
to hear that stuff. And they'd say, "Oh gosh, I never knew that." Even locals, there's some,
yeah,
and I don't know. I'm not putting myself
yeah.
out there as a historian. It's just there's stuff that I know, there's stuff that I don't know. But that's kind of where I love that you're doing some of the tours for me, because you're so knowledgeable about the different areas and you have such a passion for it, Adrian.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started off the tour, I think I'm like everybody else in the town when it comes to WB8s. They're
Yeah,
like, oh, I don't want to hear about that. Don't want to be here with him. But I'm like, for someone that comes to Sligo, I eventually slowly got into the B8's family. And I was like, you know what? So I bought WB8's autobiography. And for the very first part of the book, it's all about his childhood in Sligo.
yeah.
And he talks about people and places. And I was like, hold on, this is fascinating stuff here because you know, stories of him when he was only a young child. He told his uncle George Bodson, who he was staying at the time. He says, "Oh, sure, I'm only going out to play. I'll be back in a while." And he got a notion in his head that, oh, I want to see the Isle of Innisfree.
Yeah.
And then he wandered on. He didn't realize how long the walk was, and eventually started to become nighttime. And then he ended up falling asleep in Slishwood. But he was terrified of this old story of an axeman woods, so he didn't sleep too well that night.
Yeah.
And then once he seen the island, he walked back home. And they're like little stories that no one knows about, you know. And then
And
once I got into really,
he was very much into mythology as well, wasn't he, Adrian?
yeah, he was massive into mythology. But he got the love of the myths and the legends and the fairy stories from his mother,
Oh,
who I find that's very, very, she's the most pivotal person in when I do my tours. She is, I'll start talking about how the parents met and the kids, but I'll always bring it straight back to Susan. And I talk about how vital her role was. And
yeah, and
it was because of her, really, that they fell in love with Sligo. Like Jack would come back every year, you know, Willie would come back every now and again. But Jack would always come back with his wife. But there's a lovely wee story in a book, and he was like, because his uncle had a house out in Ballasadair, and he'd run around, you know, that's the Sally Gardens is
yeah.
inspired out there by Ballasadair. Uh, but he walked down the street one day and he seen a woman, an old woman. And back then, you know, didn't have shoes, so they just walked around, and she had no toes.
She had no
So
toes.
she had no toes. So him being a child, and you know, they don't have a filter. He walked up to her and he goes, "Well, why do you not have no toes?" And she goes, "Well, sure, look, let me tell you a story." She goes, "When I was a child, I was whisked away by the fairies over towards Colooney." And she goes, "And in their halls, I danced and I danced. They threw their magic on me. And I danced and I danced until my toes fell off. And once my toes fell off, I couldn't dance anymore. And therefore, the magic was broken and I could go home."
Oh,
So
nice story.
that's, that's
Yeah,
that's actually written in his book. Like I put that up once upon a time on the page somewhere. But
nice.
yeah,
Yeah. And they used to
think
stay out. They used to use a house out in Strandhill. What's the name of it?
it wasn't Stranding, it was Ross's Point.
Oh,
It
sorry,
was
Ross's Point. Yes. What do you call it?
Yeah,
Elsa.
Elsinore,
Yes.
Elsinore. Yeah,
Yeah. They used to stay there on holidays too, didn't they?
they stayed out there quite a bit actually. A lot of if you look at Jack B. Yeats's paintings and illustrations,
Yeah.
a lot of stuff is all in that area. Like you'll see a lot of the Metal Man, a lot of
Yeah.
stuff like that. There's actually a letter he sent, I think, to his sister Lily, and he actually drew a wee illustration on that envelope of
The
the
mess.
Metal Man.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I actually done a talk about Elsinore a few years ago. Um, in his biography, Willie talks about staying in the house and how they were terrified because at sleeping at night because they could hear the ghosts of smugglers tapping on the windows.
Wow. Yeah.
And there was like the house was once owned by John Black, the smuggler.
Oh,
That's it.
really?
Yeah, so I wanted to know who John Black was. So I went through all the old newspapers, all the old articles. So I know just about everything about John Black because he was the original person who owned the house. He passed away during the cholera epidemic in 1832. He
Yeah.
was actually very pivotal role in the fever hospital. So he was helping people in the fever hospital at the time.
Yeah.
He's the first person to introduce an actual library into Sligo town.
Yeah.
Um, he was French consul, a very, very, very important person in Sligo town at the time. His name was blackened due to smuggling in
And did
Sligo.
he smuggle? Did he smuggle?
This is the funny thing. Everybody was smuggling in the town at the time. Anyone that had money or a ship, everybody was smuggling. But what happened was there was an investigation into smuggling in Sligo town. But what happened was the guy who's in charge of the port, of all, the fees coming in, he was obviously getting money under the table and he got a wee bit greedy. So he said to the smugglers, he's like, I want a wee bit more. And they were like, no. And
Yeah.
then he says, oh, you're all a crowd of smugglers. Start black naming
Oh,
everybody.
yeah.
So the merchants of Sligo town brought him to court, and it was due to the investigation that they found out that everybody was involved in smuggling, the whole town, right? But they said that the number one person in the town, which was making the most money due to smuggling, was John Black.
Heck.
So John Black lived in Knox Street. That was his townhouse. Most merchants back then had a townhouse and a summer house. So Elsinore was his summer house. It said that there was caves, there was a tunnel leading to a cave under his house, and that's the cave that they used to smuggle for, bringing back. Smuggling was massive in the early 19th century, Sligo.
Wow.
Um, yeah, there's a lot of stories about it. Very interesting. Interesting enough, there was only one merchant in the town that actually was a defendant of the guy who's running the port.
Yeah.
His name was William Middleton.
Middleton.
That's W.B. Yeats's, hold on, I get this right, great grandfather.
Oh, wow.
He
And
was actually, I think, don't quote me on this now. It's either in the Caribbean or the Bahamas. William Middleton was actually imprisoned for smuggling.
for smuggling. Oh,
Yeah, so
wow. That's amazing.
and
And
actually he escaped prison for whatever reason. That's all the wee snippets of history that you get, like it's
amazing.
crazy. There's
And
a
of course,
so,
yeah. And go on ahead.
so there's a man defending the guy at the port when he himself was obviously smuggling too. So,
Smuggling.
so
And
everybody was in it.
and then there's a great connection between Sligo and Bram Stoker's grandparents or parents, isn't there? Like
Yeah,
they're buried in Sligo
yeah.
town as well.
Grandparents are buried in St.
Thornley's, is it?
John's. The grandmother, anyways. Anyway, that's as far as I know. There
Yeah.
was a rumor going around for a while there that it was actually his mother, but no, she's buried. She's buried in Dublin. Um, she Charlotte Blake Torney. She was only a teenager. I think she was only 14 when cholera hit the town, and she wrote a really in-depth account of everything that took place.
Yeah.
There was something like I think it was around 12 pages or something like that. Could be a wee bit more or less. Uh, Around 1830, cholera started to show its face in India. In 1831, it was in Turkey. And by 1832, it was spreading through Europe like
Europe.
wildfire.
Yeah.
So basically, by the time it got to Ireland, it was in August. It only lasted a week or two, I think, from what I've read the accounts. There's stories of her, passing through. There was one story in particular that I told during a tour. Like So I kind of go in a wee bit more about 1832. What happened during the cholera epidemic? Because our Sligo was the worst affected in the whole country.
Yeah.
Uh,
And of course, there would
people
have
were,
been
yeah,
because the merchants were coming in.
yeah, and if you caught it, you'd be it just it's so quick. Like but there were people just dropping dead in the streets, and nobody wanted to go near them. Everyone was frightened because they didn't know what it was from. They
Yeah.
didn't expect the water,
Yeah.
and then the Abbey being the graveyard of Sligo town. I mean, there was no space for bodies around that time.
Yes. Yeah.
And there were mass burial pits. Apparently there's like stories of, they start running out of soil for covering up the bodies. The bodies were like spilling out into the streets.
Oh my
One
God.
story, yeah, so they had to literally raise the wall so that the bodies wouldn't spill out. They were in such a panic to bury the dead that they weren't burying them properly. And there was one story where she was walking along past the graveyard one day, and all of a sudden an arm just came out over the wall.
Oh God.
Uh, there's stories of people come, they didn't die properly, and a couple of hours later they'd wake up in the grave and they
Yes,
just
be
come up
buried
and walk.
alive. Yeah.
So
But
you get
that's
that
that
idea. So
like I mean, listening to those stories as a child, as Bram Stoker would have been, that would have had a massive impact on him. Like that
yeah,
probably those stories probably stayed with him. Well, obviously they
oh
did
yeah.
with all his life.
When he wrote Bram Stoker, he sat his mother down. He sat her down and he says, "I want you to tell me the full account of what happened during the cholera epidemic." That 12, 13 page document is her account
It's
because
her.
he asked her before he wrote the book. So, because a lot of people don't realize that he was really badly sick up until the age of 7.
Yeah.
He couldn't walk. He couldn't even so his mom and dad would carry him from room to room,
Yeah.
and um, and she would obviously be telling him all stories about Sligo, the myths, the legends,
Yeah.
um, and again, like when you read Dracula, one of the locations is an old abbey.
Yeah.
Now, I know the Abbey is the one in the UK that they talk about, but you can't help but think that Sligo Abbey too
Yeah.
was the main kind of focus because that's where the graveyard was. That's where the mass burial pits were.
Yeah.
That's where even the once the cholera had just passed through the town, right? By the time they started going through the buildings of the town, like you could literally walk past, you could just smell death, flesh rotten everywhere. It was
Mm.
all through the town. There was a guy who was an investigator, and he came through, and he's like, he was basically telling people that building's full of dead, that building's full of dead. So all these people had to be carted. There was actually grass growing in the streets at one stage. The town was so evacuated. You know,
Wow.
they themselves locked themselves in a house there in Old Market Street. There's even stories of Charlotte's friends banging on the door for help because her parents are dead next door. These
Yeah.
are the type of stories that she had. Now they fled to Ballyshannon and then eventually she made her way to Dublin,
Yeah.
and probably never returned back to Sligo after that.
Yeah.
But yeah, those stories would have definitely imagine being a teenager during that time. Obviously,
Yeah, oh, wow. But anyhow, Adrian, I mean, we could go on and on and on forever
yeah,
talking and that's just Sligo town. That's not even the rest. That's just a small little area of the country.
it's the
That's
tip
not
of the
even the
iceberg.
rest of the country. So, but would you believe the hour is gone?
I know, yeah, yeah. That's
So
me. No, I could
Adrian,
talk about it.
Adrian has agreed, thankfully, to do a few of my tours in 2025. And believe me, if he's your tour guide on the tours, that sort of history is what you're going to get on a regular basis because the man knows the history of the country very, very well. And I'd sit and I'd listen to you all day, Adrian. And for anyone who's interested in history and Sligo history, what's the name of your Facebook page again?
Sligo Heritage and History Club.
And you also, we didn't even get to your tour company or to your film company either. We'll have to do another. We'll have to do another program, Adrian,
You'll
on
have to
those.
do a part two.
Yeah, well, but your tour company is called what?
It's Wild West Ireland Tours.
Wild West Ireland tours for anyone that wants to go over and spend some time with Adrian. And then you have a film company as well. Have you, is there a name on that?
Yeah, so that's Hassan and O'Neill Productions. So we just do small documentaries about Sligo's history. So we've released we've done three documentaries of Brian Scanlon and the history of Sligo Cemetery.
That's very
So the first,
interesting. I watched one of those. I that blew my mind away, honestly.
yeah, so and then we released the second one not long ago. We're in the middle of editing the third one, which is it's going to be about his whole history and stories since he became caretaker or started working there. So he's all these. He told me two stories when he brought up the idea of just him sitting there telling the stories, and the first two I was just like, oh, these need to be recorded.
Yeah, yeah.
Like they're absolutely amazing. Like the stuff that he's done for the like it just the man's a legend.
I
So
know. Well, I watched. You sent me a link for one of them, and oh wow! I mean, there was so much in it. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I have passed that cemetery so many times, and I never even thought about it, Adrian. Never even thought
yeah, yeah.
about the history that's inside the walls of that one cemetery alone. And he makes it so interesting. I'll have to meet the man when I go home. I'll be going home. I'm going home on Monday. Well, I'm going on Monday, but we have a tour, and then I'll be hitting Sligo on the 3rd of November. But I'll have to meet the man. It'll be very interesting. But anyhow, we have to say goodbye, and I want to thank everybody for
Absolutely.
tuning in, and thank Adrian for giving me the hour. And it's I could go on all day, Adrian. But I want to ask people,
Same.
yeah, like, share, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you're interested in any of the tours for Secret Ireland Tours next year, please contact us on the website www.secretirelandtoursllc.com and have a look at Adrian's Facebook page. What is it again, Adrian?
So Sligo Heritage and History Club.
Sligo Heritage and History Club. It is an amazing page, and the amount of information and history on it is unbelievable. So, Adrian, I want to thank you so much for joining me. And it's great that we're working together, and, you know, we'll just keep promoting Ireland and keep promoting the Northwest.
That's it. Thanks for having me. Thank you
You're
so
very
much.
welcome. You're very welcome. Okay, guys, thank you very much.